Just before the video begins, please subscribe and like the videos to help the channel grow. Thanks for watching.
It was Paul's idea.
I think it was Paul's idea.
In my brain, it was Paul's idea.
I'm not sure. It could have been mine.
What's the film going to be all about? It's a mystery to me. See it.
One month after the monumental success of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the Beatles returned to the studio and recorded the song Magical Mystery Tour. They wanted to carry on the psychedelic sound of Pepper, and the idea for a psychedelic film had been put forward by Paul. The idea had came to him while travelling from America in April of 1967. Paul felt the film could be a new source of income for the group. The Beatles had stopped touring at this point, and they needed something to replace the cash flow that had come with live performance. With the imagined success of this project, Paul intended to launch himself as a producer of film. He drew out a circle with 8 segments in which each member of the Beatles would write out their ideas. They would then be put together and they would have a complete film. Paul looked at the circle and said, "We could have a song here and a dream sequence here." This method explains why the finished product would have no storyline and no script. The idea of the film was a large group of people on a tour bus and a courier who would point out the window and say, "To your left you will see a castle, but instead there'd be crazy things happening." This film was to be shot throughout the west country of England, including Cornwall and Devon. A psychedelically painted coach, a convoy of cars, over 30 actors, and each Beatle inside a limo set off from London, and the Magical Mystery Tour began. On September 11th, the convoy, which included more than 40 cast and crew, drove through heavy fog until they reached Teignmouth in Devon. On the journey, the band got word a crowd of fans were waiting in the rain to greet them. So on arrival, they switched into ordinary cars and dashed quickly into the hotel. The mood was low. They'd all missed dinner, and the hotel they'd stayed provided no room service. A few sandwiches were consumed before most of the group headed to bed. Magic Alex was along for the filming, and that night he and Paul walked along the beach collecting seashells.
There was a guy called Magic Alex, which everybody knows about, who was a great friend of John's, and John thought he was the bee's knees because he used to give John little presents of electronic toys.
On the way, the driver decided to take an alternative route in hopes of avoiding traffic. The bus got stuck halfway across a stone bridge and traffic piled up behind them. John got so angry he jumped out of the car and ripped the Magical Mystery Tour signs off the bus. Though in fairness to John, the signs had already begun falling off along the journey. There were at least 30 cars behind them. The scene was so crazy, music journalist Marinda Ward, who'd convinced the band to let her join them, stated, "They should have filmed that because it was hysterically funny." Neil Aspinall agreed, saying, "That's what we should have filmed, the bus trying to get over that narrow bridge with the traffic building up behind us, then having to reverse past all the drivers that had been cursing at us, and John getting in a fury and ripping all the posters off the side of the coach. The driver had to reverse a distance of half a mile just to turn around, and the journey continued." This incident brought them unwanted attention, and they were now being followed by press and photographers. Eventually, the group agreed to a photo session in order to get rid of the photographers, and for all the drama of the day, no footage of Devon was used in the final film. After this, the convoy drove through Cornwall and headed to Newquay, where they stayed at the Atlantic Hotel. On arrival, the bus was swarmed with fans and press, and the police were called for crowd control. There were so many fans the police could do very little. One policeman stated, "When we got there, half of Newquay had arrived." While in Newquay, a food delivery man was introduced to the Beatles as the town's Eggman. The name fascinated the group, and even more so when they saw his vehicle the next day. They stood around as John took photos of the van. After the day's filming, Paul, Ringo and a few friends drove to the Twinehall pub in Perranporth. Paul saw an upright piano and started playing songs like "I Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside." Mirinda Ward nagged Paul to play Yellow Submarine, but he refused. Throughout the night, he'd begin the opening chords before changing to another song. As the project went on, it became more chaotic. No one knew what they were doing. The production was directionless. Ringo later said, "We would get off the bus, let's stop here and go do this and that, and then we'd put music to it." The filming process was so shambolic, when the group stopped off to buy fish and chips, the crew didn't know whether this was a scene for the film or a lunch break for the band. Paul had written down a few notes to remind him what to tell the actors or the cameramen, and that was all they had to go by. He was the closest thing to a director that the film would get. It was, and is looked back on, as Paul's project. Neil Aspinall later said, "We went out to make a film, but nobody had the vaguest idea of what it was all about. The three amateur cameramen had been filming them on the bus with handheld cameras, no tripods and no lighting." Ward, who followed them driving a minibus, later said, "Magical no, a mystery yes." There was total confusion throughout. The Beatles were used to turning up at places where their accommodation was already arranged, so they had no idea how it all worked. They were scheduled to arrive at one hotel for 8 p.m, but due to delays, they didn't get there till 2 a.m. The hotel looked closed and nobody would go and knock on the door. Eventually, they sent one of the actors to knock the door, and after that they retired to their rooms. The group had expected they could just turn up at Twickenham Studios for some of the scenes to be shot, but when they phoned, it was all booked up. They were forced to film interior scenes in empty aircraft hangars. When they arrived at an airfield, they were again swamped by fans. John and George drove up in their psychedelically painted cars. They used a shop as a ticket office for the film, and when the shopkeeper was offered to be paid, he refused, saying, "No, of course not. I'm happy just to be part of the famous four. You can use my shop for nothing." Paul put a £5 note in his pocket and the scene was shot. The Beatles at this time had developed an interest in meditation and took breaks while filming to meditate. The crew couldn't help but notice the Beatles seemed very relaxed during filming. They often wandered in and out of crowds of fans, with John and George disappearing from time to time. Throughout the film, the crew noticed the group were a lot happier when they reappeared. For the end of the film, the band were to appear in white suits, walking down a staircase in sequence before dancing amongst a crowd. A specially built staircase was designed in an aircraft hangar with 100 dancers hired to dance in couples. The extras were told not to look at the band while filming, a task that proved too difficult for some. When the film was finished, they had what was later described as a very expensive home movie. The comedy of the film went over a lot of the audience's head, but one thing everyone agreed on was the music featured was great new Beatles material. The recording for the soundtrack and the filming became intertwined. The studio sessions as disorganised and chaotic as the filming was. Magical Mystery Tour was first to be recorded, followed by Your Mother Should Know, the latter being recorded after filming had begun. The opening track was written similar to the opening of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The track was intended to welcome the audience to the album. Paul had wanted the group to perform Your Mother Should Know for the Our World broadcast. It had been decided All You Need Is Love would be more appropriate. Outside influences clouded the Beatles' judgment during recording, and the sessions were described as disorganised chaos. For this reason, George Martin decided to distance himself from the project, and a studio engineer was promoted to their right-hand man. I Am the Walrus was the most experimental track on the album. Lennon later said he wanted his voice to sound like it came from the moon. He was given a low-quality mic to sing into, and the signal was saturated. 25 takes later, the song was complete. The instrument track Flying was the only song on the album credited to all 4 members. It appears in the film over footage of clouds and outtakes of Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. The Fall on the Hill was written by Paul, who later said it was about the Maharishi. While filming, Paul wanted some shots of him in the hills while singing the song. He travelled to Nice in France, and the scene was shot. The band recorded Hello Goodbye to be released as a single. John's song I Am the Walrus was relegated to the B-side, and this made him bitter and resentful. The whole time while recording in the studio, the band were eagerly awaiting their trip to India. Blue Jay Way was a street George lived on in Los Angeles. The song documents Harrison's attempt to stay awake while waiting for a music journalist to arrive at his house. The lyrics read, "Now it's past my bed I know, and I'd really like to go. Soon will be the break of day, sitting here in Blue Jay Way." The song was later seen as George's goodbye to psychedelia, not just the music, but the whole movement. 6 tracks were recorded and they considered making an EP, but instead decided to make a double EP. Previously recorded tracks Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane, Baby You're a Rich Man, and All You Need Is Love were added to the track list to fill out the double EP. It took the band around 2 months to record everything. After the film was wrapped up, 9 hours of footage was unused. Maybe this unused footage could now be used in a Get Back style documentary. With the film complete, the Beatles were lost as to what to do with the movie. They tried to sell it to NBC, ABC and CBS, but they didn't like it. Finally, the BBC bought it at a cost of £1,000. Everyone involved knew this was not one of their masterpieces. The film was aired at Christmas, and the first issue they ran into was the BBC could only air it in black and white. The Magical Mystery Tour relied heavily on colour. When Lennon saw the film shown in black and white, he called the BBC stupid idiots. He later said the film was effing rubbish, adding, "We didn't even have a director." The fans were split. Some loved it, some loathed it. When angry callers flooded the BBC's phone lines, they responded by saying, "The Beatles made the film, not the BBC." 2 days after Christmas, Paul did an interview with David Frost about the criticism the film was getting. He stated, "I think a lot of people were looking for a plot, and there wasn't one."
When we were making it, I think all of us thought, well, this has got a very thin plot. We hope this idea of doing a thing without a plot works.
The film was the Beatles' first critical failure and a bad omen of things to come.